Ooh, more than an inch and a half. Let's see if Paul joins us now. This is our second attempt this evening, take two. And we'll just have to see what's going on here. Invite Paul again, he might not realize. We've started. Okay, how is it? Take two. I don't know what's happening. Stop doing something for a week and everything falls apart. Anyhow, okay, Paul's back. Let's see what happens this time. It says you're connecting to your audio. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, is sound okay?
Oh yeah, loud and clear. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good.
We're connected. Okay. Well, congratulations. It was a challenge.
Technology drives me insane. I have a new cell phone, and it's absolute madness. The older one was a much simpler technology, and I can actually do things with it.
What did you get?
Oh, I don't know. What was it? Some American brand. I don't know. It was given to me. Oh, Motorola.
That's not American. I don't think. Is that American? Is that?
I think so. I had Sanyo before. That's Korean.
Well, anyhow, so you're not by your Royal Ensign.
No.
So that means you're not at home.
No, I'm in about 5 miles from the American border in the Okanagan Valley. Just north of Tonasket and Omak and so on.
This is where you exactly where you were about a month or so ago.
Yeah, I'm out here frequently, and then when I've been here after I'm here for about a week, I'll go and have a meeting in Victoria, then come back to Ontario.
Well, anyhow, I have the feeling that I wasn't sure exactly what you were going to be talking about, so my title was based on something going on at my local church. Our engineers have told us that the rafters of this 175-year-old church building were blown out at least 1.5 to 3 inches, and that is going to necessitate a major overhaul of the entire church. And they're talking about shutting down the church building for as much as a year. And I mean, I was hypothesizing if this was not part of another conspiracy, we just have had a partial shutdown due to COVID, and if destroying continuity isn't part of the theme of modern world, making sure that communities don't survive intact. And on the other hand, I was thinking, how if 1.5 to 3 inches is enough to threaten us with a huge increase in liability insurance costs. The church building itself is insured for $40 million. Of course, they have to carry liability on what happens if a $40 million church collapses on 200 to 300 practitioners, parishioners all at once. And I'm comparing that to North America as a whole. How far off would you say modern North American society is to what it ought to be?
I think it's desperately off track. Now, I may be just sidestepping the way you asked the question, but um, you would probably be able to know from local history how the church dealt with it, serious outbreaks of cholera or other illnesses in the 19th century. Um, I'm sort of sidestepping that part of the question to the earlier observation that the church was shut down for almost a year because of COVID. And I suspect COVID killed very few parishioners. By contrast, in the 1830s, in what became Toronto, it was then called York, probably population of, well, under 100,000. There were a fair number of, now this would probably be in the 1840s, there were a fair number of recent Irish immigrants, and they were very poor, mostly Catholic. And the first bishop of Toronto, first Catholic bishop, was Bishop Michael Power. And I went to a high school named after him. I went to a private school. And Bishop Power ministered to his countrymen when Toronto or York was hit by one of the recurring series of outbreaks of cholera. And he was up close and personal dealing with the sick. He got sick and died. Now, in those days, these health emergencies often killed a lot of people, and he saw it as his mission as a priest, as a bishop. And you'd relate to this because I think high Anglicans or high Episcopalians are relatively close to Rome. This was not optional. He left the bishop's palace and ministered to his own people. And I think of the appalling reaction of the mainstream churches across North America to COVID. Well, in Canada, depending on the province, they willingly shut down for months on end because of the ban on public gatherings or more, well, depending on the province, more than 2 or 5 or whatever. And your church was shut down for a year. To me, that totally violates the requirement or the stricture that the people of God must worship together. Essentially, they keep holy the Lord's Day, but the monthly worship together, not just privately, like Sydney and watching Oral Roberts on TV. That doesn't cut it. As entertaining as it might be, that's not well, at least what traditional Christians understand by worship. And to voluntarily give it up, to me, is that says as much about the sickness of the basic structures in North America as anything.
Oh, I think it does, and I mean, throughout the 19th century, the big killer here in New Orleans were yellow fever and malaria, because we're surrounded by swamps. I think there might have been 1 or 2 cholera episodes, but yellow fever and malaria were really the big things. And thousands. And you mentioned Irish immigrants. For some reason, the Irish had really, they talk about the luck of the Irish. The Irish had really bad luck because their part of town called the Irish Channel, I think I guess it was the swampiest and lowest lying. And so thousands of Irish people died in the 19th century.
There was a comical song that they often used to play on the old country and western TV program Hee Haw. Something like gloom, despair, and agony on me, deep dark depression, excessive misery. If it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. And that, in some ways, was the fate, especially of the Southern Irish. They lost probably a third of their population in 2 years because of the potato famine, and many of those who emigrated to North America were on what they called the coffin ships. they're below board. Many of them were already sick. Many of them were weak, probably not well nourished on board. Appalling sanitary conditions. Many didn't make it to North America, and when and if they did, often it would take a long time to recover their health, and so these populations were really susceptible to these outbreaks.
Anyhow, you're in British Columbia. How far off center are things in British Columbia right now?
Oh, pretty sad, pretty bad. They now are worse than my own province for restrictions. There's still some compulsory masking. There's still many jobs that now require you to be vaccinated. I run into people all over who have lost their job either because they refused to go along with the masking or didn't get vaccinated. I've met medical professionals, ordinary store clerks. No, it's still a very repressive place, and one of one of the really encouraging things is that these protests have not ended. I think the deep state had hoped, well, okay, they didn't think the truckers would actually make it to Ottawa or make it to Ottawa with any numbers. Well, they came there huge numbers. Then they thought, well, okay, they'll do their thing for a Saturday afternoon or maybe Sunday, then they'll all go home. Well, that didn't happen. They were there for nearly a month before they were dispersed under the essentially like a War Measures Act. And then I suppose they thought, well, that'll do it. Besides, we've now switched channels. We're wall to wall Ukraine, just like CNN. I mean, California could slide into the sea. It would barely. It would probably not even muscle out the latest from Kiev on the news. The protests have not stopped. They continue every weekend in large cities and small across Canada. And I was in Osoyoos, which is right on the American border, on the major north-south highway, and a what they call a slow crawl convoy of most trucks and mostly civilian vehicles had started way up the Okanagan Valley around 9 o'clock yesterday morning in I believe in Vernon, and then gone city by city, picking up people, and then ending with a big rally on the American border. And we were not right at the border crossing, so the border there, and I didn't realize this, is a barbed wire fence. I doubt it was 4 feet tall, so we could walk, and there were truckers on the American side who were rallying, and so we exchanged speeches. There'd be a woman on a flatbed truck on the American side. She'd give a talk. The people on our side could hear. Someone on our side would give a talk. We had some music going, and people were shaking hands and hugging across the barbed wire and networking. And I don't think certainly the mainstream media doesn't know or just ignores all this. But this is typical of what's going on. There is a real underground movement, I think, on both sides of the border, but it's perhaps a bit more developed in Canada, of people who are in open rebellion. This is not over. This protest is not over. There was a doctor who spoke to us yesterday about some of the medical aspects. There's going to be a meeting tomorrow night near where I am of 3 doctors who have gone against some of the COVID restrictions and various stages of being disciplined and drummed out of the profession. This is a revolt that is not over, and I find that very encouraging.
Doctors being forced out of the profession because they don't agree with the state's version of the medical crisis. That's
Yes.
that's fascinating. I mean, can you? By the way, is there any way you can put a lamp behind your computer or something? Because your face keeps fading in and out. It gets very dark.
I can put some light coming down from the top. Maybe that helps.
Well, I mean, it
Uh,
needs to be on your face, basically, because it's your face that keeps getting dark. Yeah, I think that'll be better. Yeah.
you're not saying something nasty to me about racial background, are you?
No, no,
You,
no.
you, you,
I'd be very clear if I was just saying anything about that.
you just looking dark, boy.
No,
Uh,
you were coming in and out, and so
okay.
that's not possible except intergenerationally. Anyhow, let's see what I totally forgot what you were talking. Oh yes, doctors being disciplined for disagreeing. I think that's been one of the most disturbing things to me, is that there's apparently huge resistance among both doctors and nurses. I mean, the very first big lawsuit I saw was doctors and nurses at Houston Memorial Hospital, and that was one of the first defeats where a judge that I've had my own run-ins with in Houston just blew them up. Just said it was frivolous for these doctors and nurses to be demanding that they have the right to keep on working when they were going against. This is like a huge hospital of like
Yes.
5,000 employees or something, and maybe more. Maybe Houston's such a big city, maybe 10,000. But you know, if you can't have an open discussion among professionals, this is very scary. Because I mean, we all go to different doctors. None of us can sort of go to a committee of doctors. And if we happen to go to doctors, I mean, one of my oldest and best doctors actually quit. He left the medical profession voluntarily. Nobody forced him to, but during COVID, because they were not allowing him to meet with patients. Think about that. Unless they were in the hospital, he couldn't meet at his office in a normal way with patients. How insane is that?
That's the medical professionals, because of the tyranny of their professional organizations, operate under really bad conditions. On my way out, I read a story in the one of the national newspapers of a doctor here in British Columbia who has been suspended by the College of Physicians and Surgeons from practice pending an investigation, and they say that he can't be trusted to meet patients because he has expressed views on COVID that are contrary to the mainstream views of the profession, supposedly. And I thought on so many levels that's wrong, but just on a level that keeps being ignored, and that is Anglo-Saxon justice always presumes you are, and this is a tough concept, innocent, and must be treated as innocent until you've gone through due process, and only if you're proven guilty at that point can you be punished. Well, our system is pretty much like the justice system in Alice in Wonderland. Execute them first, and then bring in some evidence, and then maybe have a trial. I mean, it was funny in Alice in Wonderland. It's a sad joke on how our system has deteriorated, and judges on both sides of the war seem to be entirely fine with that. So this particular doctor is being investigated by the college about some of it. Oh, I know what he's being investigated for. He signed a number of medical exemptions for patients that he deemed worthy of being exempt from either the mask or the vaccine. Well, he shouldn't have done that. He shouldn't have. There's the authorities within the College of Physicians and Surgeons question whether these were bona fide exemptions. So, pending the investigation of that, he's basically sidelined. And many other doctors who feel similar in a similar fashion being terrorized. They know they better not speak up, or else they will endure the same fate as this doctor and a number of others. The medical, and it's been in some ways similar with nurses. Some nurses are being drummed out of the profession for expressing doubts about the mainstream or the alleged mainstream interpretation of COVID and what might be done about it.
Yeah, well, we don't want to get into too many details because YouTube seems to dislike going into details of what the objections to the mainstream narrative might be. But what exactly are you doing right now in British Columbia, and what are you up to? I mean, you said you were at a protest that started a trucker slow convoy that started
a slow roll convoy. Yeah, I'm out here, although that's not my only purpose in coming here. I don't have to fly across the country to go to protests. I've got plenty in cities, within a 100-mile radius of my own. No, I'm out here on a kind of consulting matter, and I'm out here fairly frequently. And then, of course, I meet a lot of political supporters and try to raise a few dollars along the way. And I'll be holding a meeting in Victoria on the 11th.
But you were involved in this speech giving protest between Burnham, you said, or Burnaby? Which did you say?
No, between Vernon. It worked its way down the valley. Vernon, Kelowna, Penticton. I've left something out. Okanagan Falls, Oliver, and then Osoyoos. And there'll be another one next week. I mean, the thing that this has been pretty much swept right out of the news in favor of the Ukraine and so on. But these protests have not ended because the underlying issues have not ended. And there's a lot of people who, from my college days, some of the terminology of the new left, radicalized. But a lot of people have become radicalized. I ran into a fellow today. It might be, I guess, maybe somewhere in his 30s. He said, "Well, I was a true believer up until the end of 2020. I believed." Without getting too much into the code, but he began to have some questions, and he felt that on many issues he'd been lied to, and he began to investigate, and then he's now part of the regular protests. Same thing. And I said, well, in those days, would it be fair to say you pretty much thought if you saw it on TV, it must be true? He said, yeah, I pretty much consume the mainstream news as, I mean, it's got that visual impact. I saw it. I mean, with my own two little eyes, I saw it. It must be true. And now he is, I quoted to him what President Trump said at all his big rallies as he would look down at the front row filled with the press. And he'd reach down and look at them and say, "You members of the press, you lie, you lie, you lie." And I said, I believe that's essentially the case with almost all of our mainstream media. Not on everything, of course, but that essentially they're a conspiratorial cabal who regularly lie and deceive us.
Now, you said the issues are still not over in Canada. What all is still in force in Canada? What is the status of the crisis right now?
Well, mostly federal. You can't fly without proof of vaccination, and still they impose the mask on you. Okay, again, I guess I better not get into my questions, but the questions I think would be obvious. So that applies to rail transport, I believe interprovincial bus transport, ferries, and air travel. Then many federally regulated uh, businesses like air industry, banking are under these type of restrictions. So many employees have lost their job or will lose their job, and they continue to be blackmailed. Either get vaxxed or you'll lose your job. The airline employees association won a minor victory last week when the Air Canada said, well, okay, they'll extend the deadline. That if you're not vaxxed by that deadline, well, then you're fired. Tens of thousands of people have lost their job. So one of the many outstanding issues is these people in our submission, and it's not even a respectful submission, as you say in court, is they must all be given their jobs back, and they must be compensated. Um, there's been absolute warfare uh, uh, directed at citizens, and now there's further um, concerns, and that is the ease with which they brought in the Emergency Measures Act. It's being reviewed by a special committee of the House of Commons, and some of this information coming out there is very interesting. But a further demand is that this law has got to be rescinded. The, the Prime Minister basically was allowing the banks to steal people's bank accounts. Well, okay, freeze them. And this was a way of cracking a crippling dissent. There are a number of outstanding issues, and there's a real activated group of people. I ran into a fellow yesterday, and people were joking. It'd be so easy to get across this little barbed wire fence. I mean, I don't know what security there is farther down the line on the American side, but anyway, this guy said, "Well, as attractive as that would be, I cannot go to the state. There are 9 federal warrants out for me." So I said, "Oh, what for?" Oh, he said, "Drug pushing." And he said, "I've been against the state all my life." Well, there's a very eclectic group of people coming together. People who probably would normally not be in the same room. Business people.
You said 12 federal warrants for drug pushing, you said?
Yeah. So now, part of me says, now, is that literally true? Because they could probably extradite him if it was anything serious, because we have extradition treaty with the United States, allowing perhaps for a little hyperbole. But it's an interesting group of people who are high on freedom. In fact, that's even being used these days as a mockery. This group is in favor of freedom, says the press, in quotation marks, as if we don't really mean freedom. No, we really do mean freedom. But
the speeches that you said they met at the border around this 4-foot high barbed wire fence. You said they were hugging across it. That sounds dangerous. But
I might be wrong. It might not even be 4 feet, because I could reach across and shake hands. I didn't get to hug anybody, but you wouldn't exactly be contorting yourself if he or she is near enough to you. So the fence is, wouldn't stop much.
What I was going to ask is what were the speeches? What were the speeches? And what were people saying? And I mean, since you're quoting other people, I think it'd be safe to say whatever they were quoting.
Yeah. Well, one of them was he was a trucker, and he'd been up to Ottawa, and he reported that part of what the deep state has done to try to he felt to justify the Emergency Measures Act was that they were very concerned about a former veteran named Jeremy Mackenzie. Now, Jeremy Mackenzie had started an online self-help group of people who felt isolated. This went back about a year ago. Felt isolated by all the restrictions and just wanted to talk. And he named the group Diagolon. And people talked about all sorts of things. Well, the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, which is a really evil group of people being opposed to free speech forever. The CEO is a man named Bernie Farber. He was the former CEO of the Canadian Jewish Congress. And one of their major lights is a lawyer named Richard Warman, whom I've tangled with. He has been actively working against free speech on the internet for over 20 years. Anyway, they informed the federal government that this Diagolon was a sinister, dangerous right-wing conspiracy. And according to this trucker, he believes that's one of the major reasons for the invocation of the Emergency Measures Act. You've got to understand the context. Nobody went up to Ottawa with weapons. In fact, a member of parliament, a Conservative member of parliament, asked the acting chief of police in Ottawa about a week ago, several times during a hearing, did you confiscate any loaded firearms in Ottawa? Because the rumor had been there'd been loaded firearms because it was dangerous. Well, you see, this is a different context from the United States. In most American cities, there would be nothing unusual about loaded firearms, but that would be very difficult in Canada. And the chief then said, well, no charges were laid. I guess this MP must be a lawyer because he didn't buy the being so fobbed off so easily. He said, no, I'm asking, did you confiscate any loaded firearms? The chief again went on about, well, no charges. He said, I didn't ask about charges. Yes or no, did you confiscate any loaded firearms? Very, very soft. Oh, no. In other words, the big fear that had been put out there by the complacent media about the danger of there were firearms there, which may seem laughable in an American context. Yeah, but this is the land of the wimp and the wanker. But a lot of the fear mongering was a total utter bullshit. And so this whole thing about the dangerous Diagolon group, it was an internet chat group. Nobody showed up with guns. There was no insurrection. There wasn't a storming of the government offices or the houses of parliament. Nothing like that. And what we're hoping that there will be a complete condemnation of what was done. The Emergency Measures Act supposedly has a high threshold. The not stated in it, but I suppose the imagined possibilities would be, let's say, a foreign invasion or a natural disaster so terrible it couldn't be handled without the suspension of civil rights. Again, even that might be hard to imagine. Let's say a tidal wave or what was probably going to hit Vancouver at some point because it's 250 years overdue is a massive earthquake. Now that could
Am I looking at the right thing here?
Yeah, that's it.
Who is this person? Do you know?
I do not. She may be. I'm not sure.
The Diagolon extreme. What is the Diagolon extremist group, and what does it want?
Well, the people interpreting it like this this Canadian Anti-Hate Network. I'm not sure. That's not the public safety minister because he says he's a male. Don't know who that woman is.
I think it's Alta NDP National Democratic Party member of Parliament Heather McPherson
Oh,
accused Conservative MPs of minimizing the actions of protesters at the Alberta-U.S. border. So that must be Heather McPherson.
okay, that's Heather McPherson. I thought that might be a joint Canadian-Israeli citizen, who she's a Liberal member of Parliament, and she, during the debate about the Emergency Measures Act, said that honk honk, when the truckers go honk honk, what that really means is Heil Hitler. I
Oh,
mean,
H. Oh, wow.
now for years, if a car or truck was behind me and went honk honk at a stoplight, I figured I must have not noticed that it turned green, and they're saying, getty up, go. Um, Time to put the foot on the accelerator. But anyway, she came up with, and that's another nonsense put out by the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, that honk honk is the truckers really mean Heil Hitler, that everybody is it's just absolute nonsense. And in fact, the most of the time when people are honking, many people honked at our protest this afternoon with honking support. It's usually not honk honk. It's a honk 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 honk. They make a lot of noise for, it's sort of a rapid fire thing. But according to this MP, honk honk meant Heil Hitler. So therefore, the truckers' protests are Nazis.
Oh, wow. That's quite a stretch, I got to tell you. I mean,
that is absolutely a stretch. And the interesting thing about all of this, about the diagolon, is, well, what did they do? Never mind what talk might have been on their chat room. What did they do in Ottawa or anywhere else? Well, didn't do anything. I mean, didn't do anything illegal. So Canadians have been fed a hysterical bill of fear and goods on the protest issue. Most of it uncritically passed on by the fake news media. There's the odd dissenter, but another famous, it became quite famous. On the first Saturday of the protests in Ottawa, a Conservative member of Parliament came out and was talking to some protesters. And suddenly behind him appeared a masked guy with a nice crisp, and you could still see the folds in it, swastika flag. He was there just long enough to be photographed and disappeared. But the press obsessed on that, and the Liberals for the next week. Swastikas, you see, just what we told you, they're Nazis. Well, I have been now to protests in 14 different Canadian cities. I've never seen a swastika flag. The swastika flag has basically nothing to do with the protests. It's not a revival of National Socialism. It's not it has nothing to do with World War II. In fact, one of the independent news agencies, True North, offered $1,000 reward to anybody who could identify the masked guy with the swastika flag. Well, that was a month ago, and nobody's claimed it. I mean, almost certainly it was somebody from take your pick, the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, one of the Jewish groups, the Canadian government, an agency of the Canadian government. It wasn't even a lone nutter with the courage of his views. I mean, he was nicely masked, just long enough to hold up that flag and create an issue. Fair or reasonable reporters would have said, but we have never seen that at most of these protests, nor among the tens of thousands of people protesting on Parliament Hill. This was the one lone person who did it. There was never a context. That there was more of the scary stuff. Oh, they could be Nazis.
The Diagolon, the Diagolon group is a loose network of people with neo-fascist militant views which emerge from a group of live streamers. A group of live streamers. That's kind of funny. Or I guess you and I are a group of live streamers, right?
Well, we're both alive and we're both streaming, so I guess we're live streamers.
We're a group of live streamers called the Plaid Army. Now, have you ever heard of the Plaid Army?
I've heard of it. I don't know much about it.
According to the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, CON. So that's a Jewish surname to begin with. Your acronym.
CON is actually funded very significantly by the Canadian government. It's a private group, but it's funded by the government. And I don't know if that continues, but in 2020, they got $500,000 in funding from one of our major banks, the Bank of Montreal. And they put out regular smears on, they claim that they're monitoring hate groups and neo-Nazis. Well, hate is any group they hate.
Was this the person you mentioned, the veteran Jeremy Mackenzie?
Yes, he's a veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces.
The Plaid Army has been accused of platforming and espousing rampant racism and anti-Semitic content in their streams, and had a couple of mainstays on their shows, including Jeremy Mackenzie, who has been identified by CON as the de facto leader of the Diagolon in Canada.
And you see, when you try to isolate, what are the accusations? Well, neo-fascist. Well, what does that mean? I mean, like specifically what? Are they modeling themselves? Fascism, was I think an interesting and honorable experiment or ideology in the 1920s and 30s. I guess it lasted on in Franco's Spain and Salazar's Portugal, but it was a way of organizing the state and the economy, and it was anti-communist and nationalistic. I've heard no evidence that any of these people want to reorganize the way our political representation is. And fascist is basically just a term of abuse. Racist and anti-Semitic.
What is this flag? I mean, does this flag have any significance to anybody? It looks vaguely like those flags they use for signaling at sea.
Yeah, I guess that they're saying that is the Diagolon flag, but what exactly it means, I don't know. But the important thing is that right of center views, or I hate to use their terms, racist views, whatever those might be, and that could be just criticism of immigration, or anti-Semitic views. Well, that they will now say that if you mention George Soros more than once, you're anti-Semitic. What you say about Soros is probably entirely factual, but just to notice is to be anti-Semitic. So obviously an ideology or voices they don't agree with suddenly becomes transformed through exaggeration and lies into some sort of threat to public order. And I would say that the proof of that it was all a lie is nothing happened. Yes, there was a protest that went on for almost 4 weeks, but there was no violence until the police started trampling women with horses and beating people. The truckers and all the people who came up to join them were entirely peaceful. In fact, at times it took on the atmosphere of a love-in. People were dancing, there was music, people were hugging, and there wasn't a mask to be seen anywhere. It was a good time of people enjoying freedom, enjoying fellowship. Uh, uh, and in many ways, I think that was even more of a rebuke to the deep state, that um, people really cherished the being able to be free and to interact with others, which don't that does not seem to be a particularly radical demand, and that's one of the reasons that it has brought together people from various points on the spectrum who do share that hunger for freedom. It's an interesting phenomenon.
Are there any videos online that people can look at of the events that were going on today? You know?
Uh, yes, I can maybe send them to you. I don't. I
Okay.
like. I know where to get them, but I can't just right off the top of my head.
You know, I'm just,
Some,
it sounds like I mean, what's going on in British Columbia sounds kind of like a party too. I mean, people giving speeches on both sides of the borders and shaking hands across the border. Uh, it sounds kind of beautiful, doesn't it?
well, yes, and that's has been largely missed by the mostly biased reporting by the mainstream media. This is, there'll be people who call it a hate movement. You don't see any hate there. The speakers are not talking about violent acts against leaders or anything like that. They want their we want our freedom back. Um, there's to portray this in any way, shape, or form as hate is to completely distort it. And
I think
there,
advocating any specific reforms. I guess maybe that's the question.
yes,
And
and there's language there that probably you and I would. I do hear language there that you and I would probably not be very comfortable with. Uh, I
well,
had one.
go ahead and say it. I mean,
Well,
you're,
I had one.
you're
I had
quoting
one, one
we do not believe we do believe in COVID. We do believe in COVID. We do believe in COVID. But we also are here on a news show reporting what other people think who do not
well,
believe.
actually, this isn't directly about COVID. I was assured that that the people who are taking away our freedoms, this this deep state, the globalists and big pharma, are basically just extension of the Nats and of the National Socialists. So basically, the Nazis were never defeated at the end of World War II. That they've risen again. I think this is touchingly naive, and the people saying this mean well. Far better people are the ones I've run into since the very first rally I attended back in late March 2020, people from Eastern Europe, not just the old timers, but people who maybe grew up under communism and came here, within the last 30 or 40 years. They perceive what was going on a lot faster than most Canadians. They've seen the way the state lies. They've seen the way the power is grabbed, and people are compelled to believe, or if they don't believe, to pretend they do and to practice, do what they're told, or else. They could see the creeping totalitarianism, while many Canadians were saying, well, there's a real problem here. The government must mean well. They're doing the best they can. No, they're doing the worst they can in terms of your rights. So that's one of the interesting phenomena of these protests. They bring together people with different perspectives, and they don't all draw exactly the same conclusions about the problems that are facing us. I could assure them that it is not Adolf Hitler reborn, or Martin Bormann who escaped, or anything like this. That's not the nature of the problem here, I'm afraid. Um, it's almost not worth a. Uh, uh, People have to learn. Hitler's was a plan to reconstruct a broken Germany and to reunite the German people. The people who are wanted to take away our freedoms and bring in the Great Reset. That it has nothing to do with us as a people. Then they want to, I mean, are uniting us. They want to oppress all people. They have exactly the same dark intentions for the third world as they do for us.
So would you say then that the protesters are a little bit off in their analysis?
No, there are various voices. This is, I wouldn't say that's a main, a widely held interpretation, but I have heard it. And in fact, this is it goes back to, at least in part, to a kind of left wing book that came out maybe 30 years ago about the, I think it's the new super state of the basically the ideas of National Socialism continued on even after the war in the major corridors of power, and they'll hang that on such kind of thin basis that well, the American space program was largely powered and peopled by German rocket experts like Werner von Braun and others. Um, uh, but it might also be true. It would also be true that much of the Soviet space program was um, powered by other German scientists who either were kidnapped or went east. That may be science. That wasn't necessarily the National Socialism. So that notion was based on, I think, facts that don't necessarily prove the thesis.
And what I guess have you did you learn anything from the protest, from the speeches, or from these protesters? I mean, have you found anything you didn't already know?
I didn't actually know about I didn't actually know how Diagolon had been used. I had heard of it before, um, but yeah, I learned that. And let's see, a doctor, uh, uh, a doctor named Daniel Nagosa, um, said that good health is in real conflict with the legal system, and he referenced I believe it was a U.S. Supreme Court decision a few decades ago, which ruled that that blood transfusions did not violate the religious rights of Americans. The Jehovah's Witnesses took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the ruling was that yeah, you have the right to your religious views, but blood transfusion does not. Oh, I'm sorry. No, what the issue was to avoid taking other people's blood, which is contrary to the views of the Jehovah's Witnesses. They wanted the right to store their own blood. Like if you knew you were going to have a heart operation in a few months' time, you would, uh, I guess, get your own blood drawn and stored, and you could be transfused with your own blood. Well, it was decided that that was not a right. That you had, if you were going to give blood, you had to contribute to the common blood bank, and if you needed blood, you'd have to take from that blood bank, which would violate the Jehovah's Witnesses beliefs, and that the courts were okay with that.
Huh.
So I hadn't known that, and so these talks were relatively short. So they didn't lay out a complete ideology, but I picked up some interesting little tidbits.
Well, would this be Clyde Daniel Negosa?
Yes, that's right.
Any GOSA?
Yes, and until I saw him, and I should have known better, I didn't realize he's Japanese.
That,
I assumed the name was perhaps Italian or something else, but yeah, he was well-spoken guy. I'd say maybe in his mid 40s, early 40s. Um, and these speeches were, for an outdoor crowd, almost all standing there. So things had to be fairly brief and once over lightly. But uh, I find I'll pick up something at all of these. I'd also like to think after 2 years, I know a fair deal of the subject we're not supposed to talk about.
I mean, it could be that YouTube has forgotten about that like everything else, but I don't want to risk it. I mean, we might get into more trouble talking about Ukraine these days. I'm not sure. So, but what's your plan for the rest of the week then?
Well, there's a couple more protests, and then I've got some other work to do here, and hope to do some more podcasts. And I'm organizing uh, in British Columbia for the. We're going to award Monica Schaefer and her brother Alfred Schaefer with the George Orwell Free Speech Award later in the spring.
When not this week, not this week.
No, not this week. Later in the spring, but I have some people I have to line up, and a fair number of little details. So,
is there anybody that I mean? Obviously, we had a little week or so hiatus in our podcasts, and privately off air. I'll tell you about some of the interesting developments there. But is there anybody that you would like to introduce to our audience at anytime this week, or more than one person?
Let me think about it and either tell you off air or tentatively yes, but with a concern in brackets. I mean, it depends how far you want to go. But it's not directly on COVID.
Like I said,
another thing that I find startling, and I hope this doesn't get us into trouble because it's about the Ukraine, but I thought I was taking a chance about a month ago when I was in Vancouver, and this is just as the issue was heating up. I said, well, now that we've finished the topic I want to talk about, what do you guys think about the Ukraine? The first three people to speak up were as hardcore anti-communists as me. All three of them had come from Eastern Europe, had grown up or come of age under communism. One in Bulgaria, two in Poland, one in I think Slovakia, and they were absolutely of one mind. Putin is right. Or Putin is right in the sense that he has some justifiable concerns that are legitimate and have been just laughed at by the West, and that Zelensky is basically a creature of the globalists, was actually put into power. There was a coup d'etat in 2014, which replaced a moderately pro-Russian president with a pro-globalist president. And what's being done to the Ukraine is the globalization of the Ukraine, including the imposition of a lot of diversity, which completely goes against the bedrock principles of a lot of Ukrainians. But the globalists despise an area that is almost entirely ethnically homogeneous. And the long-range goal was to kind of break that up. And Zelensky could have made a deal with the Russians to acknowledge their basic concerns, which is they want some degree of autonomy, or or want the predominantly Russian-speaking areas in the Donbass and Crimea reunited with Russia or given autonomy. And they want some sort of commitment that the Ukraine will not join NATO. They don't want NATO on their western border, which is from their own point of view understandable. You don't hear much about that in the mainstream media. Anyway, I've since found everybody from Eastern Europe I've spoken to agrees the same, basically on the same page, which is, in a rather individualistic movement like ours, unusual. Um,
Yeah.
and these people are as anti-communist as they come.
And
Interesting, because
yeah,
you never know it from the mainstream media.
you never know much of anything from the mainstream.
In fact, you might not even be able to trust yesterday's baseball scores.
I mean, and on the one hand, I mean, I don't know why Ukraine would be that much more of a threat than Turkey, and Turkey and Greece have been part of NATO pretty much from the beginning. I mean, I don't know. I guess NATO wasn't didn't the original NATO uh, didn't include Turkey and Greece, but in the 1950s they were added, and Turkey, of course, does share a small border with Russia, and it's just on the south side of the Black Sea from Ukraine.
Well, that's true, although Turkey has always, to some extent, marched to its own drummer. Greece doesn't share a border with Russia.
Right.
Um, and there was an agreement with the fall of, the end of official communism, that Ukraine would give up its nuclear weapons. Apparently, it was the third or fourth largest nuclear uh, country in the world after Russia and the United States. It had a lot of hardware, so it gave it up on the basis of some recognition of its autonomy, and the West said that it would not extend its NATO any further east. Well, it did. It became, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and then the Baltic states, and so on. And I think finally, Putin said, "Well, enough's enough. We might be able to tolerate these others, but right on our border is this large chunk of territory, the Ukraine, and we don't want it to join NATO any more than, to be fair, the United States in the 60s or 70s would have allowed a communist takeover in Mexico and allow Mexico to join the Warsaw Pact, and there'd be 200,000 Soviet troops within spitting distance of San Diego. That would not be in the cards."
It might have been better than the invasion we actually got. You never know.
Yes, actually, they might indeed secure the border.
It would be a very it would either be a secure border or it would be a white invasion. You know, those are the two options. I mean, we've got an insecure border with a non-white invasion.
I was listening to. I keep wanting to say Republic Broadcasting, but it's National Public Broadcasting. I think we get it bounced out of Spokane or something like that. And they were going on about this tremendous influx of refugees into, from Ukraine into Eastern Europe, something over 4 million, and the very generous reception they've received, particularly in Poland, and they're trying to dance around. Well, Poland and Hungary were absolutely dead set against any people coming from Africa or Syria. Well, was this racism? Well, there was a lot of dancing around that, but of course the Poles and the Hungarians and the Romanians see the Ukrainians, if not as ethnic brothers, because Romanian and Hungarians Romanians and Hungarians are actually not even Slavs, but as fellow Europeans. Another thing that has made the acceptance of these refugees so much easier is that most of them have made it clear they don't want to stay. They want shelter, they want some protection, but if things cool down, they want to go back to the Ukraine. Another interesting difference is that they're almost all women and children, whereas the invasion that Angela Merkel and others accepted in 2015 and 2016, people coming from Syria and Iraq and and other places, they're almost all male, and all of healthy military working age young males, presumably leaving the wife and kids behind to fend for themselves. It didn't leave a good taste. But I found it humorous the way they had to dance around this, because they want to be supportive of what the Poles are doing, the generosity. But they've got to know very well that it wouldn't be quite so happy if these had been hordes. Well, in fact, within the last couple of months, Belarus tried to provoke Poland by
Yeah, I totally forgot about that. Poland was building a wall
yeah.
with Belarus to keep Belarus from being a conduit for, what the British press euphemistically call Asians.
Yeah, from the Middle East, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Eritrea, and points south. And I mean, the Poles were quite clear. It's not going to happen. And because I think the Poles and well, your East Europeans in general are still pretty healthy racially. They're not too shy about saying that they don't want these people. Just like my experiences in Japan, um, once they get to trust you, uh, they're absolutely flat out about their low opinion of Koreans and Chinese, and not even necessarily political people. The average person is quite explicit. It's only we who have been uh, guilted or brain battered into thinking that being basically favoring our own against others and having a low opinion of some of the others is a bad thing. That used to be considered normal.
Well, as I said, started off talking about how the church is going to have to shut down for a year because certain parts of the rafters in the ceiling are an inch and a half to 3 inches off. And by comparison, how far off is American and Canadian society from anything that would be insurable by our parents? They would, if they could have seen the future, what would they have done differently to prevent it?
Well, the father of a very prominent lawyer I know was I think he was a tail gunner in World War II in the Royal Canadian Air Force. They had a life expectancy not much longer than that of a minnow, but he survived the war. And he said, I'd say sometime in the 90s, he told me, uh, uh, if I and my buddies, many of whom never came home, had known what would be done to Canada today, we wouldn't have gone and risked our lives. And he was talking about massive third world immigration. His friends and himself would, if that was what Canada was supposed to become, it wasn't worth fighting the Germans. The Germans weren't about to invade Canada. The Germans weren't about to conquer Canada. What was it to them? And yet, because of the way the world shook out after World War II, Canada and of course the United States and Europe radically changed, and that was his attitude. And he said, and many of his surviving pals regretted that they'd seen some of their own killed, or some of them damaged their lives in this war. Some came back very ill or damaged for this to give away the country. He couldn't see, and I've heard the same story, just changed a word or two or detail from another. Well, this would be years ago. Other old vets. There are hardly any World War II vets around anymore.
I was the last time I was in Canada was in, I guess, fall of 2007, and while I was in Vancouver, went. I was there for a couple of months, and I went to the cathedral on Burrard Street. I don't know if you know that one, the Anglican Cathedral on Burrard, and there's a lovely archdeaconess there that I developed a friendship, and so I would attend. She handled noontime services every day, and and there was almost nobody there most services, but I remember one day, can't remember what day it was, but it was sometime in the fall. There was this old guy who was alone, and so he and I were the only people at this service. And so afterwards, I asked him what his story was, and he was a World War II veteran. He was there to commemorate a day when I guess there was some sort of battle in the Mediterranean, and his ship sank, and he was the only survivor. And so he was there basically to remember and give thanks. And he, crusty old empire fellow, said, "We fought for king and country, and if I had known they were going to give up Hong Kong and move Hong Kong here, I might have joined the Jerrys."
I'm told that's not an unusual sentiment, especially in places of the northeast of England, places like Bradford and Hull, which are basically Pakistani cities. You won't hear the tolling of many church bells, but you'll hear the howling of the muezzin calling the faithful to Allah. Well, I had better go, but can I'll just drop you a little email about a possible guest.
Okay, and what's your? Do you want to do sort of makeup sessions this week since we missed all last week?
Sure, I would be available. Yeah.
I have a fellow who wants to meet you, and another fellow. I know you met Chris Donald the other night, but or 2 weeks ago or something. But have I told you about Mr. Confederate?
No.
He does a Telegram podcast. You're on Telegram, right?
Yes, I have so much trouble manipulating it, but yes, I'm on Telegram.
Would you join us tomorrow? That would be at 7:00 my time. Is that too early for you on Monday?
7:00 your time would be
5:00 Pacific.
I'll just hustle my business and 5:00 tomorrow night. Yeah.
Okay, I'll send you a link and invitation then. We'll talk about the rest of the week then. I'll tell you about the strange. You were talking about how people on our side are a little bit too individualistic. Yes.
Yeah.
Anyhow,
well, I was doing a little bit of evangelism for you all Confederates. Somebody was telling me today, anybody carrying a Nazi flag in Ottawa was probably an infiltrator. I said, you're right. And the same thing with Confederate flags. I said, well, not really. For many people in rural and small town Canada and in the United States, the Confederate flag has nothing to do with hating blacks or anything like that. It's a rebel flag. And if you are an individualist and a rebel, you like the Confederate flag. That's what it means. Something like that movie, that TV show back in the 70s, Smokey and the Bandit. The Confederate flag doesn't mean we hate blacks.
Or the Duke
I was, pardon? Yeah, Dukes of Hazzard. Yeah.
And I mean, you see it all over Eastern Europe too. You even see people in Ukraine and Russia occasionally flying the Confederate flag.
We see Confederate flags on a number of rural properties out here in British Columbia, and there are hardly any Negroes. So it's not, we dislike the Negroes or we want slavery. It doesn't mean that. It's basically it's white working class rebellion or white working class pride.
Amazing.
But anyway, I think we dole out wisdom, well, one little dollop at a time. So I hope I clarified our
Anyhow,
so see you tomorrow night.
see you tomorrow night, Paul. Good night. Get some